Iestyn Davies, welcome to Beyond Stage Fright. Now, you've been described by The Independent as having one of the most glorious countertenor voices in the world today. You're equally at home on the opera stage and the concert platform. You sing for some of the world's major opera companies and with leading orchestras, and you give recitals in venues such as the Carnegie Hall and the Wigmore Hall. You're a prolific recording artist and you've received the Gramophone Recital Award. What do you feel are the particular stresses for singers when performing?
Well, the particular stresses, I think, off the top of my head, are related to the fact that our instrument is our body. Therefore, any sort of stress that we might encounter performing is going to be reflected in the voice, and so we train to cope with those things. But you might ask a pianist. A pianist may say their heartbeat goes up, but their fingers may not be affected by that, or perhaps a string player will say that they sweat and their hands might start slipping on the strings. But there are very obvious things with all musicians to do with breathing, and I think for a singer we have to learn to deal with what happens when we're nervous and how that affects your breathing, and also from the point of view of the critical reaction, maybe from what you're expecting from a critic or an audience member, is that you are being judged as a person when you sing, because essentially you are different from another musician because of your very DNA. That's what's making you sing in the way you do. And I think that as much as an instrumentalist would tell you that they are very individual with their instrument, there is still that sort of stepping stone between them and the audience, which is the instrument in front of them. With a singer, it's very much open heart surgery. You're there doing it in front of everybody. And if you make a mistake with an instrument, you aren't necessarily judged. You can blame the tool, potentially. With a singer, if you make a mistake or you are nervous, you show it. It's not your instrument showing it. So I think that's the biggest impact that going on stage has.
Do you yourself have issues with performance anxiety, and if you do, how do you manage it?
I wouldn't say it's performance anxiety. I think I, like everybody, have nerves, and I think you can differentiate between good nerves and bad nerves. Bad nerves you can avoid because you can be prepared for stuff. Good nerves are when you know everything, and you've practiced and rehearsed and maybe even run the recital before, but they're the nerves that sort of say, will it be up to as good as I know it can be? And also, like anything, when you walk into a room and you don't know any of the people there, there's that nerves, the nerves you get, I suppose the first day at school nerves of just meeting people for the first time. And those kind of nerves, when they're good nerves, are what makes a performance really exciting, because at the end of it, you feel that you've brought those, and you turn those nerves into something else, into an energy, which I can say after recitals where I've gone the length of memorizing everything and it's live on the radio and nothing goes wrong, at least nothing perceptible goes wrong, you come out of it exhilarated because the nerves that set you up in the first place really make you focus. Now, the bad nerves, I think, which you don't tend to get as much if you are prepared, they tend to be when you think, I'm going to get found out, because perhaps you haven't had enough time to prepare, or perhaps you're singing in front of an audience, say, in German, and they're German, and you think, I know I'm not German, and there's that sort of nerve that creeps in where you think, no matter how much preparation here, I know they know I'm not German, for example. But in my line of work, it differs between the type of work we're doing. So recitals, and this is sort of when we talk about nerves, we tend to think, singers tend to associate that with giving recitals, because that is possibly the most on edge and the most at which we lay ourselves bare, really, is when you stand on the recital platform. Whereas, of course, as a singer, you get engaged to do operas, and the nerves are different there because, firstly, you're part of a team, so there are more people to spread the fear, but also been rehearsing probably for about 5 or 6 weeks. So you've had umpteen time to get this right, and also time to get out the mistakes. A bit like wringing a dishcloth of all the dirty water. You have all that chance in the 6 weeks to do that. And then hopefully what you're left with is the sort of as perfect as you can get if you're heading for perfection. So in an opera performance, the nerves don't really present themselves in the same way. They're different levels. So you may be nervous just as you go on for your first entrance, and you know it's also being reviewed, it's the opening night, and you want the thing to be a success. Or there are the nerves about the particular performance. You may be acting, you may be flying, you may be... I mean, I've done stuff where I'm strapped to a bicycle flying through the air. And of course I would have rehearsed it, but it's always nerve-wracking because in the back of your mind you think, there are people who fall off these things, there are wires that break, but they're not bad nerves, they're the right kind of nerves. And then there's the recording nerves, I suppose, which is one of the hardest things I find. Is the only anxiety I think I get as close to performance anxiety is recording, because it's a very artificial process for a start. Many people will appreciate that a recording isn't one take of a performance, it's many different takes. We have to account for noise in the building, noise outside the building, mistakes from people who are tired and you've been singing and playing for 6 hours, and also your own vocal fatigue. But at the same time, the singer in question is standing there thinking, I'm putting down the perfect version of whatever I'm doing, and playing in your head all the recordings you know of in the past that have been sort of milestones. And it's very difficult to stand outside that and appreciate how people actually want you to succeed, and they want to listen to you, and they want to enjoy it, and they don't analyse it in the same way you do. It's a very different thing when they get to listen to it. So that is as close as I get to having anxiety. And I think that the longer the day goes on with a recording session, the more you forget. And it's hearing yourself for the first time and going into the recording booth and listening and thinking, that's not what I thought I was doing, because you've got in your head a version of what you think it sounds like. And when you hear your own voice, it's a shock. And then when you hear a good take, you're like, actually, yeah, that's fine. I can do this. There's a reason why I'm doing this. And so that's how I cope with it. You just take a deep breath and you think, well, I wouldn't be standing in this recording studio, I wouldn't have done that concert in that concert hall, or I wouldn't have been asked to sing in this opera house if people didn't have confidence in what I did and enjoy what I did. Therefore, grow a pair and stop worrying about it. And, people want you to do this. This is your job, yes, but it's also a dialogue with an audience who are expecting you. They're expecting something from you. They're not wanting you to fail. So I think that's as close as I would get to any sort of real anxiety about performing.
You mentioned earlier on about breathing, and specifically breathing as a singer, and how you learn to manage that in terms of nerves. Can you illuminate me on that a little bit? Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, in a nutshell, good singing is down to good breathing. Without good breathing, without that support, the sound is not going to... you're not going to fulfill the potential of making tone and filling a hall, and also singing quietly, and all the things that you can do with other instruments by touching. Breathing is really essential to good healthy singing. And when you're not breathing properly, you're not singing properly, and you're letting yourself down. And over the period of time when you're singing, whether it's a concert or over a few weeks or whatever, there's long versions of this, you will not help your voice. You'll get more tired, you will possibly damage your voice if you're not singing properly, if you're singing in the wrong sort of support. And everyone knows that doing yoga or breathing exercises which calm you, or meditating, I don't do any of those things, but I find singing is as close to that as I can get, because I hope I sing on a good breathing technique. That's why I think I improved in my singing when I was younger, was because I learned to breathe. But those things should calm you down to the state where the good nerves come and not the bad nerves. But if it is a case where you're very, very nervous about something because it may be just beyond your limits, and you think, well, I'm going to take a risk. That can do things to your body which will affect your breathing. I was once in a concert where I was singing an aria from a Bach Passion, and we'd done the concert the day before, and I was very complacent that it was all fine. And that day I didn't really have much lunch before the concert. It was a matinee concert, and I felt very happy anyway. And I got up for this big aria, and it's quite a slow one, 12/8, and the violinist and the conductor started it, and it started much slower than I expected. Now, it might not have been slow, but in my head I thought, this feels a bit... And I started telling myself all these things. Well, I'm not sure that's the right speed, or will I get through this? And oh God. And I started talking to myself and listening to the inner voices. And as a consequence, I started breathing badly. I started breathing quite high up. A bit when you're a child and you're crying, you can't take the breath, and your diaphragm starts to sort of spasm. And I started breathing too high and not having enough breath, enough support to get through the phases I need to. And I started taking breaths all the time, and it became very sort of early music and breathing after every dotted note and all kind of really off the voice and not very good. And as the aria went on, I got more and more stuck, and my larynx got higher and higher. And the last phrase, which is this beautiful flourish, I just had to put down the octave at the last minute, because I thought, if I do that, something's going to happen. I'm going to fall over. And I even said to myself at one point, this is going so badly because I've taken too many breaths and my breath's too high and I can't actually sing as a result of it, that I might just fall over and pretend I fainted because I felt so bad, and then I'd get away with it. Anyway, I got through it and sat down. It was fine. And the soprano said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Oh yeah, no, just a bit dizzy." But that was a perfect example where the breathing was interrupted by my conviction misconviction that I wasn't going to get through it because it was too slow. And so I made myself nervous. I made myself panic. I didn't trust myself. So that's on a place where breathing can be affected.
You've given me some fantastic examples of how your inner voices sort of had a go at you. Tell me the kinds of strategies that you found really work when things don't go so well on stage.
For example, there are times when you may be singing something from memory, and it might be in an opera, which you know very, very well, and the inner voices start saying, you don't know the next line, and you can't think of what the next line is. And I had this the other day where I'd been doing a role in a play, which we'd been doing for 3 months, and about halfway through, after about 34 performances, I had 3 days off to do something else. And I came back, and because my natural routine had been slightly adjusted by doing something else completely different, when I came back, there's a bit where I fly on stage from the ceiling, and I got hooked up, and I went across, and I just thought, oh, I haven't actually thought about what the aria, because it was so second nature and I was on autopilot, I hadn't thought about what I was about to do, and I couldn't remember the first word. And there was about 4 minutes to go, and I kept saying to myself, I do know this because I've done it 35 times, and I couldn't start it. And I had to sort of call up to the guy winching me across, who's the caller and the stage manager for the show, and I was mouthing, what are the words? He shouted that to me, and I remembered. But of course, I said to him afterwards, it's funny how that happens. It's so you develop strategies, and that's those situations where you have to force yourself to think of something completely different for about 30 seconds, and then take yourself. I mean, this is only possible when you're not singing, you're off stage. In that sort of situation where you think you're going to mess up, is to think of something completely different. A bit like when you're trying to remember a name, you can't. I sometimes do an exercise to get. I'm very bad at names, so I'll go if I can got the picture of the person in my head, and I can, you can always taste the name on the end of your tongue, but you can't say it. I'll go through the alphabet, A, B, C, and I will, without fail, 90% of the time get the name from the letter in the alphabet that it begins with by just going through the alphabet. Because you do something to your brain, you wire it. And I think that's the trick, is to learn to realise that the inner voice or the thing, when something does go wrong, is to not dwell on it. And that's either think about it and think, oh God, I've let everyone down, or I'm going to get a bad review. But to think of it in a different way and think, well, in the middle of a performance is forget about it straight away, because you've got to move on to the next thing. But also to realise that people don't necessarily notice those sort of things, and so you have to forget about it. One example, well, not example, but one way I suppose in a very general sense I cope with performing nerves, the sort of bad nerves or worrying about things, is to try and go to concerts and go and watch other people singing or playing. And I do this sometimes when I've been off for a while, and you come back and you think, I know what I'm doing, but I haven't tasted the stage for a bit. And I remember sitting in somebody else's concerts in the Wigmore Hall, and I was sitting there thinking, it's a very strange thing being in the audience, but it's very good because you realise how much of what's going on stage actually passes you by. And that sounds like it was about a concert, and it wasn't. It was the fact that the connection between you and the stage, depending on where you sit, but certainly I was halfway back, even in that hall, it's a small but beautiful acoustic, I felt disconnected in some way. And it's really interesting because we think as performers, we really are communicating. You have to actually go that extra 110% when you're on stage to really communicate with people, not just with text, but your eyes and the physicality and the way your face is for a start, just to be there in the room. The slightest movement can really put up a sort of a defence or a wall between you and somebody in the audience. But it made me realise that my sensation of being a member of the audience was, God, I just want this to go really well. I wasn't, God, I want him to fail. Or I just sat there and thought, what is it about being on stage that makes you think anybody in the audience is willing you to fail? Like, everybody there wants to just relax. What they don't want is the embarrassment, the very English thing of being embarrassed. And I think everybody, not one person goes to a concert saying, I want to be embarrassed. And then as a performer, we feel embarrassed that we make a mistake. And if we make a mistake, the likelihood is nobody will immediately feel embarrassed. But if you sort of question them to feel embarrassed, say, well, if you make mistakes all the way through the concert, then it starts to get embarrassing, in the same way that if somebody is drunk and they're trying to explain themselves to somebody, after the first time they say something, you think, oh, they made a mistake. But after half an hour, you go, this is embarrassing, this person's really drunk. And then I'm embarrassed. Whereas I think in a concert, it just passes you by.
How much feedback do you get from the audience?
How an audience reacts to what you do on stage is, I thought, and I think many people do think, fairly four square. If they enjoy it, they clap, or they stay silent. And if they're not enjoying it, they'll cough or fidget or whatever. And also the idea that certain things you do with your performance will display themselves in certain reactions to the audience. And that just isn't true. Because, for example, in this play, I get 20 minutes throughout the play of singing, and the rest is a normal play of people talking. And I started to notice one night that a certain line that the lead character was delivering, after about 5 or 6 weeks, he started getting applause, and it happened 3 nights in a row. So it wasn't just a one-off, it was 3 nights in a row. And I said, why are they clapping? They used to laugh, and now they clap, which is a very spontaneous thing, but it's led by attention. He said, all I'm doing is I'm not taking a breath at this place, I'm just running it through. And as a consequence, it had a sort of tension which wanted to be released by the audience in applause rather than laughter. And from a musical point of view, there was the very first aria I sing when I go on stage. It finishes with the orchestra continue playing, and I walk off stage as they continue playing. And I'd say every single time, apart from 2 times, after I walk off, it's a very slow, quiet aria. The orchestra finishes, I'm already off stage, there's silence, and then the character starts speaking. Twice, there was applause, and I have no idea why. And all I can put it down to is one of those nights, just as I was about to walk off, I lingered on the stage for a second more, and I thought, oh, I've never done that before. Walked off stage, and then they applauded. And I think it was as simple as that, was that, and it could also be that there are different people there every night, of course, but when you're looking at that sort of ratio, where it's like 2% of the time there was an applause, I must have done something very similar on those 2 nights, which were different nights and different weeks, to have made somebody applaud in the same way that the actor was running through. There must have been something about the way in which I cadenced with my face and my body, because it was after I'd sung that I walked off, that did that. And I learned a lot from that. And it's a very simple thing, but I thought, well, how an audience reacts to you, you can't prepare yourself for it. You think you can. It can be very superficial what makes an audience react. and you just have to look at reviews to know that. I mean, one person's terrible opinion of their opinion of a terrible concert can be somebody else's, the best concert they've ever seen. And I put that down to the fact that if people clap after something, often it's not because they thought it was good, but because something made them clap. And I think that's true with, people always say the Wigmore Hall audience, for example, they have this kind of the leader audience who reacts to a fast song, even though it's in a different language. They don't necessarily know what it's about, but it ends at a dum 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 dum. They go, yeah, and there's a chuckle, and you can do that. And it's a superficial thing, but it even in very multi-layered, deep, meaningful art, there is still that sort of natural human thing, is to judge the book by its cover and just react. And I think if somebody claps, then it might make somebody else clap, and then the claps fade out. And so that person could easily be a reviewer who says, I really enjoyed that, but they're judging their reaction to it rather than whether it was actually any better than the night before. I think a lot of feedback you take with a pinch of salt, because you do get a lot of balmy people at concerts saying balmy things, or just often people's need to speak to you has nothing to do with their opinion. It's more to do with just wanting to be seen backstage or touch the aura of the musicians or something, or be involved. So people, and I'm a victim of that too, which in the sense that I've done that myself, and you get in a flurry when you're, near people but you've never met, and you say silly things. So I think it's good sometimes to, like with reviews, take it with a pinch of salt, because an audience member could also be a reviewer on another day. So it's if you're prepared and you know what you've done and you've given your best and you don't feel ashamed of what you've done, then I think after a recital you've earned the right to actually ignore what people think for a day or two, because it's not world famine or sort of international disease. It's a concert you've given, and most people have got some pleasure from it.
You talked a little earlier about how you sometimes have to take the focus off yourself or off what is important in a concert to make things work. But generally, how would you say you keep your focus on stage? I
think there's a very fine balance in your mind. For example, when you're doing a song recital and I'm thinking about when I memorize stuff, lots and lots of words, is to sort of, it sounds really cliche and it doesn't really mean anything, but be in the moment, which is, if let's say you are honest and you're prepared and you've done lots of practice and you've sung through this stuff and it's gone well at some point, is to trust that will happen again and to really live slightly thinking ahead. You can do that when you're prepared. You slightly anticipate. And I think that's true of music in general, is to anticipate, whether to listen to other people or to listen to the rhythm and anticipate the inner rhythm of everything. So that if you've got is not to listen to yourself too much as well when you're singing a strophic song, which you could mess up the words in any number of times. You've got repeats and repeats of the music and different words. That, for example, is a perfect opportunity to really get yourself in a muddle, because you could start listening to yourself and then thinking, oh, what if I forgot? Oh, I mustn't forget. Oh, I forgot. I don't know how I do it. I don't know how people do it, but it's a bit like running, I think, or jogging or something. It's not. I think when you're jogging, if you listen to the rhythm too much, it gets very kind of, and you need to always slightly keep your eyes looking around you to keep the journey interesting. So without focusing too much on the audience, it's to sometimes not get too fixed in one place, and just to sort of relax and again, like when you forget something and you forget a name and you sort of change the subject and it comes back to you, is to do that in a performance. If you sense that you're about to talk to yourself in your head and you get an inner voice, it's just flick your eyes somewhere else, do something, look at someone's hair or something else, or even sometimes when you're standing with a piano, for example, seeing a lot of singers tend to put their hand on the lid of the piano, and that's quite a nice thing. You can sort of just squeeze it, grip it. There's something like a stress ball. It's just to release a bit of tension or something, or even just to turn and look at the pianist. It just changes the wave slightly, so that you're not on the same thing and then suddenly taken by surprise by the whirlpool or whatever's coming up. I also think there's things you can do before you go on stage about when you eat. I'm not one for sort of lecturing people about what they eat. It's really, everyone's different. But I tend to find that if I've eaten a meal just before I sing, it's probably not great because you just feel full and you're breathing. But also where the way the energy comes from food, and if it's good sort of low GI kind of food which releases energy slowly, then you want to have had it in such a time that it's releasing itself at the right time. So if you're the kind of person who shoves a quinoa salad down, you have it a couple of hours before the concert, not half an hour before. Similar with a singer, we tend to drink lots of water, but it's not many people realise that water during a concert makes no difference. It keeps you hydrated in 4 hours' time, but not at the time. So if you've got a recital, drink some water at midday. If you're going to drink your 3 litres or whatever it is a day, get it in you throughout the day, not just before you sing. So that you can go on stage saying, well, I've prepared all I can, and now it's up to me and the audience to take this on to the next level. And that's the best way to begin, to sort of try and be focused. And I think if you're not looking forward to a song in a program because you haven't learned it properly, or you haven't eaten and you're a bit tired, like when I did this Bach Passion and I was feeling very tired, I couldn't focus. So you just have to set yourself up. And I will say one more thing, which is that you realise how much you do focus, even when you're not thinking about it. When, for example, you've done a lot of work in a similar period of time, say an opera where you've been every other or every 3 days doing an opera at 7:30 or a concert tour or something like that, and then you come home and it's very difficult to do anything during the day because your days as a performer are geared to this moment. So often you will find that you don't do anything on the day of performance, and that helps you focus because your energy, even though you might enjoy walking and feeling, the air and going out and doing things, your mental energy and the way in which you really perform are focused onto a certain time of day. So in a way that sort of helps you. And you often find that you will, turn down an interview on the day of a concert because it just isn't sort of fair on your brain to do all that thinking and talking before you have to get into something else. Because even an interview is a form of a performance. Outside, it's not just on the stage that you learn to focus. It's focusing the way in which you live your life at the time you're performing. I think is crucial to giving yourself the best foundation to go on stage.
You do a lot of international performing. How do you manage the logistics of the crazy international performer's life with jet lag and airports and hotel rooms and all of that?
Again, I think a lot of it's in the mind, is not to worry too much. And sort of plan ahead and think, well, I've got a concert tomorrow, I won't have a drink after the concert, I'll get that extra hour sleep, which of course is very difficult because as everyone knows, on tours, there's a very social atmosphere, there are a lot of people to choose from, to talk to, people you haven't seen for a while, and lots of distractions. But I find sometimes those distractions are good, and actually did a concert recently in Lucerne, and the next day we did one in Versailles in Paris. And we had a 6 o'clock bus in the morning, a flight, then a bus from Paris airport to Versailles, which took a good hour and a half. Then we had a 20-minute sound check. Then we had an hour off. And then we had the concert. And actually that concert was the best one on the tour. And there was something about the fact that there was no chance, that we had nothing going for it, that actually made it really good. So the adrenaline, now it's not something you would then necessarily want to repeat the next day, but fortunately, I went home the next day. But I think the sort of, I wouldn't say excitement, but the fear, and also everyone just sort of gave in and said, well, never again. I'm never doing this again. And of course, you do because you forget what it feels like. But it was a really enjoyable performance, and I think the distraction of having a beer after the first concert and just sort of relaxing took your mind off it. There aren't really hard and fast rules about how to deal with jet lag and stuff like that, other than, you be prepared, but also be prepared for the unexpected. I mean, you're always going to be on late flights, and you just have to rely on technique and to get you through it. And I think that's true of all performers, not just singers, in that you'll only really be successful if you can fall back on a very solid foundation of knowing what you're doing, and also appreciating that people think that you know what you're doing, and not to let that go. And I think the people who maybe wanted to be something but weren't didn't have the trust in that. They may have had it, but they might not have believed in it. So when people say believe in yourself, I think that's sort of the very foundation thing. It doesn't mean you can do everything and become the thing you necessarily want to be, but it gives you a pretty good chance.
And what does it feel like when it's all going really well on stage?
I won't say, it sounds corny to say it's the best thing in the world, but it is at that very moment the best thing you could be doing, because it reminds you why you do it. And I was saying to somebody the other day, having just had off, 4 or 5 days of Christmas where I wasn't doing anything, and been working non-stop since the end of August with only 3 days off ever, I said, why did we go back to this? I had to do a Messiah in Glasgow on the 3rd of January, and I hadn't sung since the 23rd of December. Now that's not a particularly long time, but in terms of singing, if you haven't actually opened your mouth every day, you get very used to being a normal civilian. And so the idea of getting out of bed and warming up and going to do a piece I know very well, but at the same time having to take it very, very seriously was really hard. I thought, why do people do this? But then I said, but of course, and I said to him, so of course, when you're on the stage and you're singing and there's silence and you express yourself and you feel that that's gone somewhere and touched somebody, or even if it's very selfishly, you just feel good about it. It's like when you crave water in the middle of the night and you're really hot and dry and you go and have it. It's that sensation of, that's what I'm meant to have water in my body. That's what it's meant to feel like. So your desire is quenched, I suppose, as close as you can get to it. I think the Welsh have a phrase, hiraeth, which is that sort of longing for home. And it's we don't really have the same word, but it's a kind of, if you're not doing it, you have that hiraeth for singing. And I'm not a Welsh speaker or anything like that. I don't want to get right out here. I'm from York, but I'm half Welsh. But I do sort of understand that there are these sort of feelings that some languages don't have words for. And I think that's the same with singing. But maybe that sort of Welsh desire for everything that is your homeland, hiraeth, is the answer I should have given you.
Iestyn Davies, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you.